Hello and welcome to Windows in Time, Community Support 101, What the Carpenter Family Gave Us, presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Leah Pestizo, Digital Services Specialist. This program is being recorded, so please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure a quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Lakawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and Modoc Nation, who were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. We take this moment to recognize the indigenous peoples whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. And now I'm going to hand it off to Larry.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Windows in Time. My name is Larry Mullaly. I'm presenter on behalf of the Southern Oregon Historical Society in this joint venture with Jackson County Library Services. Just an announcement about something coming up. It's very exciting and it begins today. The Southern Oregon Historical Society is one step closer to a new museum with today's opening of rotating exhibits in its History Center lobby and adjacent areas in a 24-hour video platform displaying items of video or objects from 100 years of films and its collections. There's a special mobile collection here for the next several weeks entitled A Century of Wonder, 100 Years of Oregon State Parks. It's free of charge, and you just have to walk down the street to the classic Art Deco Southern Oregon Historical Society. Today, we have a very exciting presentation because this is such a significant local topic, not about people that once were, but people that once were and people that are, and we have two of them here today with us. The presenter is Alice Mullaly, well-known in Southern Oregon. She grew up here in this valley, blessed to be related to her. And she is one of our finest local historians. Her topic is Community Support 101, what the Carpenter Family gave us. But we also have with us, because this is a panel presentation, Emily Mostu, who was raised in the Grove family, and her daughter, Allie Mostu. And Emily is the third generation member of the Carpenter Foundation that you will hear about. She has a lot she can personally contribute. And Allie as well, who represents the fourth generation. She soon will be going on the Carpenter Foundation. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Alice.
Isn't this a wonderful picture and quotation to be thinking about the future thing? The meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. And that's from the 50th anniversary booklet about the Carpenter Foundation. So it's very special to have that today. And I wanted to let you know that the reason that we got this whole topic started is because I've been fascinated by people who give back to the community, and they do it in a major way. And the Carpenter family is kind of the model for community building that we have in this valley. And so I wondered about the family and their motivation for becoming this film.
Powering on. Welcome to All Tech Lansing.
So I interviewed Emily and Allie and learned much more about the family. And so the way our presentation is going to go today, I get to talk about the interesting former members of the family who have been involved with the Family Foundation. And Emily and Ollie will then talk about the foundation's history and where it's going. future. So that's our presentation today. So this valley is a very, very special one for nature and surroundings that we have and we love. But what makes it really a livable community is that we're a center for medicine, for theater, for arts, for some kinds of agriculture, and education. And all of those things are important because the Carpenters have provided much of it. So here is more about them. It all started with these three handsome men, brothers Dunbar, Alfred, and Leonard Carpenter. They'd grown up in Colorado Springs. They were there because their father had tuberculosis, and that was one of the places that people went in the 1880s in order to try to recover from tuberculosis. Their family had been in New York City. Their mother's father, so their grandfather, was a merchandiser in New York City. They lived on Park Avenue. So they had some wealth in the family. The boys all went to Harvard. Dunbar on the left went to Harvard Law School, so he was a practicing lawyer back in Colorado Springs. The other boys came back to Colorado Springs. Leonard was a journalist, and Alfred was he sold real estate or insurance, and they didn't seem very interested in whatever it was they were doing. And young people with some wealth that they could buy land were coming west. So Leonard especially thought he'd explore the Hood River area. And he was out west doing that when he was contacted by friends of theirs from Colorado Springs. Maud Bemis had been a neighbor of theirs that they had grown up with, and she had married Reginald Parsons. And if you know the history of the valley, Reginald Parsons established Hillcrest Farms, which is still in the same family today, Hillcrest Orchards and Roxy Vineyards. So he wrote to Leonard and said, don't buy anything in Hood River till you've seen Medford. You may want to come here instead. And that's exactly what happened. And they bought the land just to the west of the Parsons place and started becoming farmers, orchardists, actually. And they truly put their sweat equity into that place. So here are Leonard and Alfred plowing the land, which they did, and planted 7,000 trees for their first Veritas orchard. Dunbar also came, but he was practicing law in Medford, and he had a young family, and they actually didn't stay too long in the valley before they moved back to eventually to Boston, where their family had been and prospered. The two men, Leonard and Alfred, didn't know much about agriculture, but the very new in the valley was the Oregon State University Extension Service. And they took advantage of that ability to learn about how to be orchardists. And they were very progressive in doing so. They built a home on the orchard up on the hill, and the two bachelors lived there. Then in 1917, Leonard married a woman that he had met here in Medford when she was here with her first husband, and Winifred. So he and Winifred took a lengthy honeymoon trip. And during that time, Alfred took care of the orchard. And they kind of traded off taking care of the orchard and traveling. So in 1921, Alfred decided he would go around the world. He was still a bachelor. And remember this, it's going to come back again, that he took this trip around the world. Okay. So here's a part of the family tree. And this part in bold print are the people that were involved in the foundation. But there include other people who are here in the valley and who made contributions to the valley. So we're first going to look at Leonard and Winifred. Leonard, as you can see from all of this list of things, was very active in kind of the organization of many different parts of the valley. He was an educator, was active in the 30s in trying to come up with programs for the Depression. During World War II, he was chair of the board of rationing, which had to do with how much food people could get of different kinds, and so forth. But he made a tremendous contribution in agriculture because he recognized that if you're going to have a significant crop every year of fabulous fruit to sell around the world, you need irrigation, and this valley didn't have it. So he's responsible for getting together with other people and putting together the Medford Irrigation District that got its water from Fish Lake. And that, with the Rogue Valley Irrigation District, irrigated the whole north end of the valley, all the way down to their orchard on the northeast side of Medford. And then smaller orchardists really couldn't make a living by selling in fancy fruit markets like Chicago, New York, England, Asia, without having carloads full of fruit. And the small orchardists couldn't do that. And so they came together and formed Southern Oregon Sales. And you see this building and the sign still today. Down on the south end of town. So Southern Oregon Sales was a cooperative. He was the first president, and they put together sales all over the world for smaller orchardists. Winifred was also interested in a number of things, but especially the community hospital. And we wanted to show you the building because it's still there. The community hospital, at the time that Winifred was on the board and was president of the board, it's located on East Main, just about a block from Hawthorne Park. The building is still there. It's an office building today, but this is what it looked like in the 1950s. So know that that's an old building. By the 1950s, it was having problems, and we'll see later what the family did about that. But what Winifred and Leonard were most known for, when you read their obituaries, is that they were supporters of the arts. Very important supporters of the arts. And don't you love this picture? They're driving through their orchard. Then Alfred and Helen. Helen absolutely fascinated me. Such an interesting woman. She grew up in Binghamton, New York, where her father had a manufacturing company, and he and his brother had invented a number of devices that mechanized timing. So, for example, you come to work and you put your time card in the machine and it stamps it, and then when you leave, you put it in again. Well, that's a kind of machine that they invented. A few years later than I'm talking about right now, in 1924, this family, or this company, was merged with a couple of other companies to form something that today we know of as IBM. So this family owned the original stock in IBM, and it's that rather large amount of money that came to each of the members of the family that allowed them to start some of the major fundraising things that they are funding of things that they did. But Helen, who grew up a socialite in Binghamton, albeit I don't know how much of a socialite one is in Binghamton, but she was, and she also was in the social scene in New York City, where she met and married Kenneth Kellogg. And they took a trip around the world, no, around Europe for their wedding, for their honeymoon. And, but apparently Kenneth was not well, and I haven't determined what happened to him exactly, but in 1916, he died. So here's Helen, left a young widow. And the war in Europe, America is about to join. So she, along with a number of other women in her social position, paved their own way to go to Europe to work for things like the YMCA and the Red Cross. Helen worked for the Red Cross during World War I. And that kind of altruism is seen throughout her life. When she comes back, she goes to Pasadena, where her family has now moved. And in 1921, she decides to take a trip around the world. Have we heard about this before? And sure enough, Alfred and Helen meet shipboard romance, and while in Egypt, they get married. So their marriage certificate comes from the American consul in Cairo, Egypt. And this is in early 1922. They continue their trip as part of their honeymoon trip and extend it a little. So you can see travel in those days were lengthy kinds of things. You talk about taking a trip for a year. When they finally came back, they came to Pasadena and they spent a couple of years there. But Alfred really wanted to get back to the Rhone Valley, and they did. So Helen continued her interest in a number of different things. And so these are just a few of her contributions. I'm going to start down at the bottom picture. This is a gift that the Carpenters gave to Harvard University. It's called the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts. Remember, everybody's gone to Harvard in these families, all the men. And this particular building is very significant architecturally because the architect of the day internationally was Le Corbusier. And this is the only building of his that was ever built in the United States. So it's a pretty important and significant architectural building. And the Carpenters paid for it. Then working up, Helen and her sister very much revered their father. And so they gave money to the college that he had gone to, which is Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, and started they contributed to a scholarship fund, and then they built this dormitory. And this is a modern picture, so the dormitory is still there and still being used at Hamilton College. And then here in the valley, their son, what's his first name? Harlan Carpenter had become an architect. He'd gone to Harvard and studied architecture. And so they commissioned a Red Cross building here in Medford. And it was built in the 1950s. And this is a picture of it today with Harlow's architecture in it. So that's kind of fun to have all those special things they did. The Women's Overseas Service League is another piece that she was involved in, which is another story for another day. Alfred now, they come back to the valley and he builds this beautiful home up on the old stage road called Topsides. And Topsides today is the Hummingbird Vineyard and Bed and Breakfast. breakfast and winery. Beautiful, beautiful place. The family says that the remodeling that they did to make it a bed and breakfast is just excellent. So they very much approved of what you've done, what the new owners have done. But you see other things that he contributed to. Again, the extension service was so important, and the Oregon Shakespeare Festival we'll talk more about too. So, remember the medical center building on East Main? Well, when Leonard and Winifred retired and moved to Carmel, Alfred took over the chairmanship of the board of the community hospital. But the community hospital was too old, too small, and we desperately needed a new hospital. Sacred Heart Hospital, which was the other hospital in town, was closing. So this little 50-bed hospital was nowhere near big enough to take care of any kind of modern post-World War II medicine. And here a couple of things got started that have carried over into the foundation. They could have built a hospital themselves. They have plenty of money. But Alfred said the best thing to do is for the community to be involved in this hospital. So what we'll provide is seed money, matching funds. And then he trained people in the valley in how to go about getting contributions from others. And that's what built the first Rogue Valley Medical Center. It was highly criticized for being put way out in the fields of southeast Bedford. Today, well, it seems centrally located, but at the time it was, you can see from the pictures, they're just out in the fields. And this picture is from 1962, and I believe the first edition has already been put on the hospital by then. I think just those first two wings are the original hospital. And someplace buried in Asante today are these buildings. I'm not sure they could be identified as such, but they're there someplace. Okay. This is a quote from a dedication to the Red Cross building, but it really talks about how they went about giving firmly, graciously, and with compassion. And that's going to show up in the foundation as well. So here's some more things that they did. During World War II, well, first of all, college scholarships are going to be very important, and Emily and Holly are going to be talking more about that, but they were always important from early on in their life here in the Valley. And then in World War II, imagine this. Medford is a town of about 11,000 people. Camp White is a training facility with as many as 42,000 people. So when those 42,000 people want recreation, where do they go? What do they do? They go to Medford. Then the question is, what do they do? So the Carpenters started the Jackson County Recreation Committee, which with a number of other people provided a series of venues where soldiers could go for recreation. So the Wing Inn canteen out at the airport and the USO clubs. The current University Club building was a building that they provided for a USO, the officers clubs. And the picture at the top here is St. Mark's Episcopal Church that ran a USO for enlisted men. And then they were always interested in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And the original festival was in a tiny little stage with hardly any facilities at all. And they came to him and said, we'd like to build a new theater. This is the new theater in 1949. The outdoor theater, that's all there was. And so he did the same thing here that he'd done with the hospital. He said, okay, we will give you half the money, but the rest has to come from the community. The community has to be involved. So that's the Shakespearean theater. Carpenter Hall is named for them, by the way, theater. And then when they're getting older, Alfred and Helen, and they feel like this should be something that continues on. And Dunbar and his wife have come to the valley, thanks to Leonard saying, I need somebody to take over the farm so that I can retire, and they did. So we're looking at a new generation now, the nephew of Leonard and Alfred, who have come to take over Veritas Orchards, and it is they who take on the next role in giving in the valley. Very interesting people again. This family is just fascinating. So Dunbar, in World War II, had he's a Harvard graduate. Did I mention that the men all went to Harvard? He's a Harvard graduate, and he, during World War II, was training glider pilots in Oklahoma, and he learned that in a club at Harvard, along with ski jumping and some other things. When he arrived here, he was at the Veritas Orchard place that Leonard had and built an award-winning, architecturally home there. Do you still live in that home?
Or my cousin does.
Okay. And he threw himself into farming. I can't believe the agricultural things he was involved in. Here's a few business things, but you see, the Oregon Horticultural Society, the Medford Pear Shippers, Oregon Egg Producers, he had 10,000 laying hens at one point. Quite a remarkable thing. And so Grosso Company, I think, is significant because he recognized that the fancy pears they could send to the big markets and get good money for, but not all the pears are fancy. Some of them have problems. They have spots and things that make them not special. So this company was designed to use those not fancy pears and not let them go to waste. So that was what he did there. His pear label, I think, says a lot about him, both a sense of humor and his interest in skiing. So there's the Dunbar of Medford pear label that went on their boxes. That's a great fun one. But he also was a real patron of the arts. And besides the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, he helped establish the Road Gallery and Art Center. He was on the Oregon Arts Commission. The lower picture shows him with Governor Tom McCall, who appointed him to the first Oregon Arts Commission. He was recognized nationally and served on the National Endowment for the Arts Board. And then for the Carpenter Foundation Board, he was involved for 50 years. Very important in that world. And Jane, who didn't want to come to the Rogue Valley because she wanted to raise her family in a city where you had opportunity, did come, but found here what she was afraid she would find. No juvenile justice system, no children's mental health, no special, the schools were not particularly good. So she immediately launched into righting some of those wrongs, and part of the Jackson County Community Action Agency, which brought Head Start and Planned Parenthood to the valley. She was so involved in these social activities. And then she was also involved in many of the kinds of things that her husband was. They helped to establish the Brit Festival. She was on the state board of higher education. Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the Clinical Board, so many different things that she was involved in, and the Carpenter Foundation Board for about 40 years. So she was very involved there as well. And now we're up to the current members of the foundation board. And I get to introduce Emily Mostu. Is Karen here?
No.
No. Okay, sorry. And Emily's daughter, Emily. And they are going to share information about the foundation itself and where it's come from and where it's going to. So I'm going to turn this over now to Emily. And, oh, let me show you their picture. There are the two of them. Very, very important in this community today. And we're so fortunate to have a 65-year-old foundation. Really remarkable. Emily.
Thank you, Alice. It's been such fun working with Alice. She has such a wealth of knowledge and research capabilities. We have really learned all kinds of things about our family that we thought we knew, but now we know much better in a very specific way. So that's been terrific.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about the foundation itself, how it was formed, the critical people who've been involved, and the critical decisions over the past 65 years that have sort of changed the foundation and brought it to where it is today. So this basically is the charge of what we look at. This is why the foundation is here. And I don't think I need to read it to you. You can read it yourself, but it really sort of in a nutshell says who we are and what we're trying to do. Again, Janie's philosophy was basically that this is an investment. That's why we're here. And it goes back to the tree that you saw at the beginning that basically says, you're looking at the future, even though you may not be there. So now I'm going to leave this slide here for a minute and talk about how the foundation was formed initially. So when it was established at the very, very beginning, it was what is called a family foundation. And the members of the board were Alfred and Helen, their two children, Julie and Harlow, and their nephew, Dunbar, Carpenter. And they also had their attorney that participated that could give them guidance in various different legal approaches. And that was the board, and they made all the decisions. Janie was brought in probably around a couple of years later, and she was brought in to look at the scholarship program, which had been very, very important to Alfred and Helen, but it had never quite been formalized. So she came onto the foundation in 59. In 72, there was a major sea change. And that was that the board decided that having just family members was not a good investment in the future, that we needed to bring other people on to be part of the foundation, bring community members. So the way it was set up at that point was there were established 6 positions for the family members, and each family member served 5 years, and they could be, as I like to say, re-elected ad nauseum. Then there were the community members, and there were 4 positions for community members. And this basically, they could serve 2 two-year terms. So after 4 years, they would go off and new community members would take their place. This was a really important decision for a variety of reasons. One is it brings new expertise and other ideas of things that the foundation trustees then talk about and look at. But it also, as you probably all know, all families have their quirks and their sort of intricacies between family members, and this formalized it and basically made it a much more efficient and lot more protocol, less, what would you call, divisions between family members showing up as part of the decision-making process. So then Janie became the chair in 1975. She'd served, as I said, since 1959. So she was chair of the foundation until shortly before her death in 2007, so over 30 years. And Dunbar served as treasurer for that long, actually longer, and he was really important in keeping the financial basis of the foundation going. Janie had a social work background, and that has colored and affected everything about the foundation and how it operates, as I'll explain in a minute. My sister Karen came on in 1978 and has been secretary ever since. And I came on in 1986 and became the chair in 2007 and has been president since that time. So there's a real continuity in the family as being part of the foundation. Two other sea changes I think that are important to talk about. One is in 1992, the foundation hired its first professional. So we hired a program officer to basically handle all the details of the grants, which is critically important. There's a myriad of details that we're obligated to keep on top of. And the other sea change, and I'm not quite sure when this happened, but there was a decision that was made to only fund grants that took place or affected Jackson and Josephine County residents. And that makes a big difference because we fund somewhere in the area of about 60 grants a year. We give out somewhere in the amount of $700,000 a year. And that has a big impact in a 2-county area where it really would not have much of an impact if you're talking about a statewide or nationwide foundation, as many other foundations are. And it really epitomized Alfred and Helen's great concern for the community where they live. So the way it works is nonprofits submit applications to us on a quarterly basis. We take a look at those applications from several different perspectives. We look at them in terms of what the application is for its project itself, but we also look at the health and well-being of the nonprofit organization. We look at the board of trustees who have the responsibility for the ongoing establishment of that organization. We look at the membership of the trustees from the terms of what are their occupations, how long have they served, how many are there. The organization is really dependent on its board as far as how well it continues to serve the community. We also look at its finances. We look at their budgets. We compare their budgets to their income statements and their balance sheets. And we try to really look at the organization as a whole. And that makes a huge, huge difference. So as you see on this slide, we give in 4 different areas. We give in human services, education, the arts, public interest, and scholarships, which I will talk about in a minute. Human services are our priority and largest area of giving. And here is a list of some of the organizations that we have funded. Access is critically important in terms of an outgrowth of the community action program that Alice talked about earlier that Janie was involved in when she first came to the Valley. Compass House serves mentally ill. It's basically a club for mentally ill individuals to participate. And you can go on down the list and see here a number of the ones that we have funded. I love this picture of La Clinica, and it is a huge organization point, serving thousands and thousands of people. But this was their very first, way back when in Phoenix, very small clinic that started them. So that's a lot of fun to look at. Education is our second largest area of funding. Classroom Law Project, for example, is a statewide organization that funds civic education in the mostly in the high schools. And as we all know these days, civic education is probably absolutely critical for our survival as a nation as we go forward. Consumer credit counseling serves people by giving them financial information of how to deal with their finances, how to balance their bills, how to establish a budget. Phoenix Talent School District, we've funded to send some of their students to Academia Latina at SOU, which basically gives them a sense of what it's like in a college campus. But maybe that'll make it feasible for them to feel better about going to college at a later time. And on and on. Oh, here's a great photo of Camp Eek at Wildlife Images. They do summer camps where they introduce children to animals and their habitats. And the arts is our third biggest area of funding. And again, as Alice mentioned, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I think we have funded them every year of our 65 years. Since it was a real attachment and connection that Alfred and Helen had. An interesting side note is that Alfred and Helen, when the Shakespeare Festival was much smaller and just a summer festival and mostly made up of college students in their summer activities, would host at Topsides, the house that you saw there, where they would host an annual party for all the Shakespeare company. And I remember attending those as a child, and they were fascinating. So it was lots of fun. So they reached out in other ways besides giving money. Anyway, the Brit is another organization that Janie was highly involved in and feel like that it adds so much to our community. Not only do we deal with people who are in need in terms of human services, but there's also the spirit and the soul and all that part of human nature that we also try to respond to. And public interest is an area where it's sort of our catch-all. There are many things that don't fit in the other three that are really important to our community. Thousand Friends of Oregon was basically explaining people the land use laws and how they operate in the state. The Southern Oregon Historical Society, as you all know, is a critically important part of our valley and has the second largest collection of Oregon. So that's the variety there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about scholarships before I hand this off to Allie. And that is, it's been a critical, important part of our foundation for years and years. We commit $100,000 to the 10 high schools in Jackson County each year. And the 100,000 is divided proportionately based on the school's high school population. And then we give the funds to the schools, and the schools make the decision about which individuals get the funds. And we have given them some guidelines, like being in need and that sort of thing is an important area to consider in granting the funds. And this sort of, again, epitomizes that tree under which you sit, that you don't necessarily expect to gain from. One example, in our 50th annual anniversary booklet that was done back in 2008, is a fellow who named Richard Benner that we gave a scholarship to in 1965. And he went on to teach in Jackson County schools for the next 32 years. So it's that kind of continuum that we're trying to foster and support. I do have a few booklets up here that you're welcome to take home with you from that time. And I also have I'd open it, but if I put this down, then you won't be able to hear me. So an annual report that we put out every year that is on our website, but it also, if you open it wide, talks about our guidelines of how you apply and what's required. And then it lists every application that we funded and every project. So you can really get a sense of the whole. So I have a few of those. If anybody wants to take a look at that, they are welcome. Or take one home. So now let me pass it on. That's sort of the history and where we are now. Let me pass this on to Allie, and she can go from there. Thank you.
I'm here representing the next generation, and basically concluding the presentation. Okay. It's been a real honor to work with Alice in the Southern Oregon Historical Society, like Emily said, and really interesting to have an outside perspective on the family and the foundation and this concept of giving and the impact that it's had and the accumulative impact that it's had on our local community. So I hope you've come to appreciate, as we really did through working with Alice, the individuals and the choices they made years ago and the ways that they gave to causes and organization in our community, and then the way that was formalized into the foundation and the way that's been able to continue giving in the community and perpetuity. It's really cool for me to look at the pictures in the presentation and know those places because of frequenting them now, be it Shakespeare or Brit or the hospital, and to realize this connection that goes back years and a generation, and just a testament to the impact that we can have over time. So thank you all, and thank you to Alice.